Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. This is Macy Moore with the National Association of Regional Councils. And I'm very happy to welcome you to today's webinar on how the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission is responding to racial inequity. Like all regions, LVPC has a very unique story to tell about their low-income communities and communities of color and how they're responding to the needs of these communities. Located in eastern Pennsylvania, the Lehigh Valley has a regional population of over 600,000 residents as of the most recent U.S. Census Bureau estimates. With a projected 24% population increase by the year 2045, the Lehigh Valley is one of the fastest growing regions in Pennsylvania. Much of the population growth in the Lehigh Valley that they're seeing is due to the significant industrial growth, which, along with the region's close proximity to Philadelphia and New York City, it's helped make the region the fastest growing corridor in the nation for warehousing and logistics, the second fastest growing freight corridor. Let's see. The Lehigh Valley Planning Commission was founded in 1961 and is the county planning agency for Lehigh and Northampton counties and the 62 municipalities therein. To tell us about LVPC's efforts addressing racial equity, we are honored to have with us Becky Bradley, our LVPC's Executive Director, Samantha Smith, Chief Community Planner, and Jill Seitz, Senior Community Planner. And to go through their bios real quick, Becky Bradley, of course, Executive Director, has over 20 years of experience in city, regional economic development, historic preservation, and transportation planning, including significant implementation experience in community revitalization, infrastructure investment, roadway design, and trail construction. She's been the executive director since August 2013 and is leading a $2.5 billion regional transportation planning program. In the first half of 2020, Becky launched the Expanded Equity and Access to Opportunity Analysis, an online engagement tool, which we'll hear more about today. Chief Community Planner Samantha Smith joined the commission at the beginning of this year. Through her 14 years of professional experience, she is versed in a variety of planning specialties and understands the importance of supporting local governments. While relatively new to LVPC, she is passionate about the Commission's role in providing expert-level guidance to municipalities and in advocating for the equitable future of the region. Samantha graduated from East Carolina University with a Bachelor of Science in Urban and Regional Planning and Public Relations. And Jill Seitz, Senior Community Planner, has been with LVPC since 2017. She is part of the team that competed in the 2018 Lehigh Valley Equity Analysis, the first ever in the region. Additionally, she is one of the data engineers behind Data LV, the Lehigh Valley's online data source for development, housing, education, and many other topics. Jill graduated from Temple University with a Bachelor of Science in Community Development. So before handing things over, a quick few items, just wanted to let you know there'll be a quick Q&A at the end of the webinar. If you have a question at any time, please feel free to enter it to the questions box on your control panel on the right-hand side of your computer screen. And want you to let you know that this session is being recorded and will be available tomorrow on our website. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters, and they will take it from here.
Thank you very much, Macy and Neil, for inviting us to do this today on a topic that we are super passionate about in the Lehigh Valley. As Macy had noted, our first equity analysis we actually did in 2018, and Jill was the lead for that, and she's also been the lead for the update that we just finished this summer. I just wanted to note on that front too, that we actually got the idea for this at a NARC executive directors council meeting when we were going around giving our few-minute presentations on what we were working on, and it actually heard about similar efforts going on in Atlanta, and then in Western Ohio. So I wanted to give a shout out to our fellow MPOs and COGs in those areas for really being the inspiration for what we're going to show you today. So it's really been quite a year. We've had increasing development activity. In fact, since 2015, we've seen over 3,500 new development plans of a variety of scales and types. And just this year alone, we've had over 9.74 million new square feet in just commercial during a global pandemic, on top of proposals for over 2,000 new housing units. I believe Jill or Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think last month we had proposals for over 600 new housing units, I believe it was. I think it's even higher than that, but I wanted to underestimate there a little bit. So as our neighbors, which are a lot more high density than we are, have really been, especially the New York Metro, kind of the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Northeast United States. We're right adjacent to that. And so as those very dense areas have are making their way, and actually in a very coordinated way through the pandemic, a lot of people are starting to move into our region. They already were. We've had a sustained population growth for over 60 years at this point. But all of this is happening when we have an over 10% unemployment rate, when last year at this time we were essentially at 0% unemployment and having a very hard time finding workers for all the jobs that we had available, because our economy is been hopping and continues to move along. Simultaneously, and Jill and Sam are going to tell you a little bit more about this, we have over 70,000 families who live here now that are paying more than 30% of their income on housing, putting them at significant risk of losing their home, especially if their employment status should change. Yet any house that goes on the market sells quickly, in some cases, and actually in most cases, in under a week, many times 1 or 2 days. So how we work has seen a hard reset too, and the continued challenge with the office market that everywhere in the country is experiencing, and the addition of critical infrastructure to residential neighborhoods to support things like remote work and remote school, whether that's cellular, electric, or broadband. Our children and education have been rocked to the core as well. As you know, K through 12 and college and university systems have been scrambling to find space to social distance or equipment and internet access for remote learning. Parents are attempting to balance work and pseudo homeschooling with without any real increase in resources. So everyone is challenged. And no one really knows how the educational outcomes are going to be affected. Meanwhile, our children, young adults, educators, healthcare providers, childcare centers, and even our governments are really walking into this brave new world with our chins up. It's the only thing that any of us really can do. Parks and recreation use is skyrocketing. In fact, at our lowest count location, we've had over 1,000% increase in trail usage in our region. We have the Appalachian Trail, as well as a multi-regional Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Corridor that goes through our region and connects Scranton to Philadelphia. The usage on that is insane, literally at this point. So that's forced us to rethink our transportation investments as well. And so we're really refocusing our lives around personal and community health. And we finally are having the honest conversation that we're going to tell you a little bit more about today about race and ethnicity, and charting a more equitable path forward. What better time than now when we're in such a substantial period of change?
2020 so far is certainly one for the history books as new challenges and new opportunities emerge for our region. We will continue to embrace the power of many to advance the goals of the region and come out better than ever on the other side of the pandemic. Fortunately for the Lehigh Valley, the region's comprehensive plan was only recently adopted at the end of 2019. Development of future LV, the regional plan, included extensive public input, and the goals, policies, and actions of the plan were formulated from the community's expressed desire for their own future. Through embracing the power of those residents who inform the plan, these recently adopted planning policies and actions have allowed the region to respond quickly and intentionally to the effects of COVID-19. Future LV outlines the community's vision, and the challenges that have emerged through 2020 have offered an opportunity to quickly put that vision into action. The Lehigh Valley Planning Commission is actually made up of two entities. We are the planning agency for Lehigh and Northampton counties, and our staff also supports the Lehigh Valley Transportation Study, our region's federally designated metropolitan transportation planning organization. The LVPC and LVTS have combined efforts to create a singular vision and investment strategy for the region through Future LV, establishing a comprehensive, innovative plan for the community. The innovation of this plan comes from the merging of the region's comprehensive plan, looking at land use, community, economy, natural resources, and so on, with the long-range transportation plan's transportation and investment scope. The combined effort identifies goals, policies, and actions and creates a balanced, forward-thinking approach to building a sustainable future for the region while addressing today's needs. And we're nimble enough to undertake this sort of joint planning effort through the advanced cooperative history of local governments in our region, and because we as a staff serve both the LVPC and the LVTS. We're one of very few joint planning commissions and MPOs in the country.
Our regional plan uses a series of themes to tie policies and actions together, with equity being one of the most prominent themes of focus identified by the globe of people you see under these two policies. Equity is woven throughout the plan's goals and policies, with specific actions under each policy that work towards those goals. Each of the plan's goals is represented by a different color. The policies here are from goals 4 and 5. Each of the policies then has actions or implementation items that more specifically address how to accomplish the policy in consideration of the community's equity needs. Both of these policies support equity in the region. Policy 4.3 supports equity in the regional economy with actions such as supporting job training programs, improving multimodal transportation access in areas with high or growing employment opportunities, expanding technological access, diversifying the types and prices of housing, and promoting mixed income neighborhoods. The other policy, from Goal 5, supports equity through inclusive and livable communities with actions such as implement complete streets and traffic calming measures, encouraging universal design, promoting safe routes to school, and supporting cultural programs.
Throughout Future LV, we also included visualized examples of how these concepts, when incorporated into community spaces, can create stronger and more sustainable communities that are a safe place for everyone. The vision of these concepts is meant to demonstrate how we can regionally ensure equitable access to transportation, jobs, resources, and other quality of life factors our communities deserve. We use Future LV as our foundation in finding regional solutions to global challenges. Challenges ranging from COVID to equity are faced head-on through consistent implementation of the plan. The plan facilitates a coordinated approach by encouraging intergovernmental cooperation on issues by addressing them not only from the land use perspective, but also in terms of transportation, environment, social, and economic considerations.
One example is the unprecedented collaboration and coordination happening among 39 of our region's 62 municipal governments through multi-municipal plans. Not only are these joint comprehensive plans noteworthy for their intergovernmental partnerships, they are significant in supporting zoning and land development coordination across community boundaries, providing regular interactions and supporting cost and ultimately tax savings. It is no accident that these efforts and others are active and growing as the communities rise to challenges and capitalize on the opportunities that growth creates. The LVPC is at that table, advising on or leading these efforts along with our two counties, Lehigh and Northampton. The LVPC is leading the charge in facing the region's equitable shortcomings with fact-based optimism. Our reputation as the region's most reliable and neutral data source is something we take very seriously and apply to everything we do. Understanding what is happening now and what we can accurately and reasonably predict for tomorrow, next year, next decade, and beyond is crucial to overcoming equity constraints and to avoiding the creation of inequities for other groups.
When it comes to equity, at-risk housing assessment, and other COVID response, our partnerships are multiple and broad-ranging. We've partnered with the United Way of the Greater Lehigh Valley to map food access points while so many families suffered through job loss, and are working with them to create a data platform for their participation in the National Age-Friendly Communities Initiative. In the spring, we took action to assist the Allentown School District, the third largest in Pennsylvania, to identify concentrations of students without internet access as they navigated the start of virtual education. At the urgent request of our two county executives and 3 city mayors, the LVPC created a web map identifying households at risk of foreclosure or eviction based on existing cost burden conditions. This tool, which was created using a series of census block level data sets, allows users to layer at-risk households to identify areas of need. Our communities are able to use the web map to intentionally respond to neighborhoods in the worst conditions to reduce long-term impacts of eviction and foreclosure. We most recently began a partnership with the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, who's working to evaluate at-risk households from a different perspective. The Federal Reserve's data evaluates housing risk based on occupations most at risk of job loss due to the pandemic. The partnership we've formed has led to our gaining access to the Federal Reserve's data so that it can be combined with our foreclosure and eviction tool to allow the community to make even more informed decisions in providing aid and response. Not only that, these data sets will supplement and inform the Commission's equity work.
The emphasis on equity in our mission and approach is really important because equity looks at outcomes, identifying what tools or resources are needed to be successful. Comparatively, equality as an approach is about equal treatment, where tools and resources are evenly distributed. That doesn't necessarily result in enabling individuals to overcome barriers to success. Historic discriminatory practices by both public and private sector entities have created a modern-day imbalance in opportunities available, despite strides taken nationwide to correct those injustices. So addressing needs is not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Aside from a social justice perspective, we recognize that equity plays a critical role for the regional economy. Increased equity has been found to reduce poverty and boost economic growth by increasing incomes and thus increasing one's ability to participate in and contribute to the local economy. Increasing the diversity and inclusivity of the Valley's workforce also enables businesses to leverage talent pools of different populations. So improving equitable opportunities isn't just a race or minority issue. Addressing disparities really makes life better for everyone. These reasons are why, earlier this year, we felt it critical to update the 2018 equity analysis to reflect current conditions. The equity analysis is an evaluation of the level of access different demographic groups have to certain factors or opportunities that enable a person to be successful. Opportunity factors and demographics are considered together to determine where opportunities are present and who has access to them, and to ultimately identify what disparities are and where those areas are, so that we as a region can focus our efforts to create broader opportunity for success for all communities.
A critical component of the equity analysis is, of course, examining who actually lives in the region and how the population has been evolving. The Lehigh Valley has been diversifying at an increasing rate for decades. 82% of our population today is white, which has decreased from the 99% rate it was in 1970. Understanding this trend of population diversification is vital to anticipate the future needs of Lehigh Valley communities. This and other demographic and access to opportunity graphics are included in our 2020 equity analysis, which we will go through soon. As we discuss the analysis, we will stop on specific graphics to discuss their importance and meeting at the regional level. In addition to increasing racial diversity, the Hispanic and Latino population of the Lehigh Valley has grown at an exponential rate, nearly doubling each decade over the last 50 years to make up around 1/5 of the population today. You'll notice in this chart that we show a breakdown by race, and then a label for each shows what proportion of that race identifies as Hispanic or Latino. This is really important for understanding that Hispanic or Latino is identified as an ethnicity and not a race in the census data, which affects the way in which we are able to relate Hispanic and Latino data to racial groups. Additionally, significant percentages of almost all racial groups identify as also being Hispanic or Latino. So for example, Blacks make up 6% of the Lehigh Valley's overall racial makeup, and 19% of that group identifies their ethnicity as being Hispanic or Latino. This complicates what has been many people's longtime understanding of racial and ethnic makeup, because many people expect race or ethnicity to be Black and white, when in reality there is a lot of overlap.
Becky, can you share your institutional and historical knowledge of the city of Easton and their ethnic and racial diversity?
Yes, it may not necessarily be related to people who are Hispanic or Latino, but we have a significant Syrian and Lebanese population in the Lehigh Valley, and they're located throughout the region. Prior to joining the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, I worked for the city of Easton, who's had a historic Lebanese population for well over 50 years at this point. They self-identify on the census as white, yet culturally and socially within the community, they may or may not identify that way. And so the census data, we feel, is a real issue for us in the way that people are counted, because it really doesn't give us the detail to address the specific needs of specific even racial, cultural, or ethnic identities in our region. So we've had to find different ways to handle that as a measure of the equity work that we're doing. For example, we offer an Arabic option for our publications. So if people need that in an alternative language, we can do that for them. We'll also do that a lot for Spanish speaking individuals as well. But it could be a variety of different languages. But we automatically have been putting that into our work program and what we do for years. And interestingly enough, now that this is part of the national conversation, then it makes it a lot easier for us to have this as a commission conversation with those communities. Though they know they've been supported all along, now it's just something we do every day instead of waiting for someone to call and ask us for something specific.
So we've mentioned the 2020 equity analysis a few times so far. We believe the best way to really demonstrate the analysis, which is web-based, is to show it to you. So Macy, if you can switch us over.
Great. So to make the analysis easily accessible for our communities, we provided a direct link right on our homepage, which is lvpc.org. You can see that right here. The online platform also enables us to continually update and expand the information as opposed to a static document. The analysis lives in the section of Data LV, where we provide all kinds of data and analysis for different topics. There's a nice little intro section right here under equity, but since we've already shown you most of this information, we're going to skip ahead to talk about opportunity.
The equity analysis is built upon determining what opportunities are essential for a person to be successful and maintain a high quality of life. Success has a different meaning for everybody, but generally what we're looking at is, do people have access to quality housing, education, and employment opportunities that are needed to make a living, and do they have access to transportation to travel back and forth between those places? The analysis uses 14 data points across those 4 categories: housing, education, employment, and transportation, to assess areas of the region on a scale of very low to very high access to opportunity. It then looks at what populations are living in those areas to identify patterns of significant disparity in levels of access to opportunity between different groups of people. Access to opportunity is essentially a way to score someone's ability to be successful and to achieve a high quality of life based on these 14 factors we just talked about. We look at the different levels of access afforded to all residents across the region for several demographic groups, with a special focus on racial and ethnic disparities. To identify disparities, we pulled out American Community Survey data for people who are indicated that they are white alone, which means they identified no other race and are not Hispanic or Latino. Non-whites who indicated they are any race other than white alone, and everyone who identified themselves as being Hispanic or Latino, which includes people who are white and people who are any other race. The white and non-white data stand alone, while the Hispanic or Latino data overlap with both white and non-white. As we mentioned earlier, this is because of how the data is collected, with Hispanic or Latino or ethnicity being collected separately from race. As a region with growing Hispanic and Latino communities, it was really important for us to be able to assess access to opportunities or lack thereof for a group that makes up nearly 20% of the region's population. After assessing overall opportunity access for the entire Lehigh Valley, we found that white individuals are twice as likely to live in an area with very high opportunity compared to non-whites, and only 38% of Hispanics or Latinos have either high or very high access to opportunity, a significantly lower rate than both whites and non-whites.
One of the most important equity factors for us to evaluate is educational attainment, because barriers to education reemerge through other inequities. Hispanic or Latino residents are 3 times more likely to not graduate from high school compared to white residents, which severely limits employment opportunity. Another important factor we look at is how different opportunities interrelate and affect each other. For example, we evaluate English speaking proficiency relative to education because of the significant impacts language has on high school graduation. In the Lehigh Valley, we have between 85 and 86,000 people over the age of 25 that have indicated that English is not their first language. Of those people, 24% did not graduate high school. That's nearly a quarter compared to only 7% of born English speakers. Not graduating from high school is severely limiting in terms of accessing future opportunities because of limited job options and prevents home ownership and building of personal wealth. The limited opportunities for income based on educational and employment constraints results in limited options for owning a home, which is one of the most common ways to build wealth. In our equity analysis, we found a significant disparity in homeownership between whites and non-whites and Hispanic or Latinos, with whites being almost twice as likely to own their home than the other groups. Further within that non-white racial category, we found that only 38% of Black households own their own homes in the Valley. Lack of homeownership can also further reduce educational opportunities for future generations of minorities. Home ownership is one of the most common ways for a family to build wealth and is also used as leverage to finance higher education. So you can see how low access to one opportunity can affect other critical opportunities down the road and intergenerationally.
Poverty is a circumstance that's often difficult to get out of and frequently has impacts that transcend generations because of the limitations to opportunity created by poverty. Based on the equity analysis data, if you are Hispanic or Latino in the Lehigh Valley, you're nearly 4 times as likely to be in poverty than if you're white. The percentage of residents in poverty is one of the factors considered in determining access to opportunity, which is, again, a way to score the ability to be successful.
Although it's undeniable that racial disparities exist in the region, it is important to also consider that race is not always the equity issue, which we found when assessing internet access. Internet access can be affected by lifestyle choice, particularly for senior citizens that grew up without it and don't feel a particular need for it. We assess internet access as an equitable opportunity because as technology advances rapidly, individuals that do not have adequate access to internet become less competitive and have reduced opportunities such as job access and education. When the pandemic hit and schools were trying to figure out how to continue learning virtually, our region saw the impacts of disparities in internet access. The Allentown School District, for example, was faced with a difficult situation where out of over 16,000 students, nearly half of them did not have an adequate computer or internet access to support distance learning. We were able to partner with the school district and use our equity analysis to help the school district quantify those needs and identify where. And the school district was able to allocate funding to meet those needs. So while all of these charts assess equity at the regional level and provide context for existing disparities, we knew the data would be most useful to our communities if it were accessible at a smaller scale. So we developed an interactive tool for assessing equity at the click of a mouse. The 14 data points mentioned earlier form the basis of this interactive opportunity map. The colors represent what level of access to opportunity each area of the region has, and you can see the legend in that top right corner shows very high access in the darker green color down through to very low access being the darker orange. So at a glance, you get an idea of where opportunities may or may not be present. So then over on the left-hand box is all of the equity data we mentioned with those 14 data points that go into the opportunity map. And this actually enables you to window in on a specific geography you may be interested in and find out details for opportunities in that area. So for example, we're going to zoom in on one of the more urban areas of our region between the city of Allentown and the city of Bethlehem. So for both of these cities, you can see that they have areas ranging from very high access to opportunity all the way down to some very low access to opportunity in downtown Allentown. Community organizations or communities themselves are able to click on areas of the map. So here I'm clicking on an area in downtown Allentown that has very low access to opportunity. And these data points in that left-hand box change to reflect the conditions of that area. So if I'm wondering, jumping over to the city of Bethlehem now, if I am wondering why this downtown area has low access to opportunity compared to this adjacent area having high access to opportunity, I'm able to click back and forth and see different data factors that are determining that. So homeownership rate is a frequent example that we see, higher homeownership rates in areas with high access to opportunity. For transportation, lack of access to a car severely limits access to opportunities. We have employment rate, population in the labor force, educational attainment, and we also incorporated some standardized state testing, PSSA scores for the state of Pennsylvania to determine public school district performance. And then this last data point, preschool enrollment rate, is a frequent indicator for education, educational opportunities. Also,
I just wanted to jump in real quick, Jill. The key point on zero access households, when Jill had initially done this in 2018, we used that as a basis then to develop our transportation infrastructure investment strategy in future LV. So we knew we wanted to target more multimodal improvements and more improvements generally into those areas that had lower access to opportunity. We actually convinced our MPO board to only invest outside of the interstate highway system and Route 22 and State Route 33. Both of those take more than our interstate highway, take more traffic than our interstate highway. only into those areas that had low access to opportunities, and to then increase that investment into transit, into walking, biking, and ADA facilities.
So just the last thing I want to show you all in this map is if you scroll down in that same box on the left-hand side, we included demographic data for each of these geographies as well. So one thing that we cannot stress enough about the equity analysis is that it's not just important what opportunities are present where and whether there are high or low access to opportunities. It's especially important to look at who is living in those areas and therefore who does or does not have access to those opportunities. So then again, clicking between different areas of high and low access to opportunity, what you will typically see is that those areas that are more diverse actually have lower access to opportunity than some areas that have higher access to opportunity that may be less diverse. What is less obvious when looking at the equity analysis is that the lesser diversity in suburban and rural areas is also an equity issue that causes limitations for those communities. Because while suburban and rural communities tend to have that high or very high access to opportunity, low rates of diversity show that opportunity may be limited to only being accessible by people of certain backgrounds. Inequities do exist in every community, and every community has opportunities to improve their equity and see their residents benefit from that.
Out of this analysis, our communities identified further need for good data to inform their decision-making, especially in response to pandemic-related needs. That led us to develop a foreclosure and eviction risk tool, which is also available on the Data LV website. So that tool is in the housing tab of the website, and similar to the equity analysis, there is information generalized for the region and an explanation of the analysis. But the tool itself allows a user to zoom into a specific area of interest. This data set is actually at the census block levels, the census block level, so it's a little bit finer grain than the equity analysis is. Here you see 4 data sets. They are 2 each for a percentage of cost burden renters and 2 for cost burden owners. The information is percentage in volume, excuse me. The information is shown for each of the data sets on a sliding scale, similar to the equity analysis, where the darker color indicates a more severe condition for the folks living in that area. We provided the renter and owner data by percentage and volume intentionally. So by percentage, the darker blues indicate that 80 to 100% of the area is cost burden. In some cases, 100% of the areas are cost burden. But by volume, sometimes that's not a very high number. So in the more rural areas, that's going to be the darker green. And the lighter green indicates 50 or less households. So in the more rural areas where there's not very many renters, it does appear that more of those folks are in a cost burden situation than would be expected. Just to back up a little bit, cost burdening is where folks are spending 30% or more of their gross income on housing costs. And one thing we found when we started this work was that while we expected it to be a little bit more spread out than just our urbanized areas, cost burdening appears to be a concern throughout the entire region, from the urban areas to the suburban areas to the more rural areas, and including the more affluent townships, the ones that that have a reputation of being pretty well off, so to speak. Folks there are experiencing cost burdening as well. What's turned on screen now is ownership, and similarly, the darker orange indicates there is a higher percentage of cost burden owner households. We understand that there are instances where folks choose to spend more on housing. Perhaps it's because they want their children to attend a specific school district, or some other lifestyle choice. However, that doesn't represent all of the households in this situation, those that are in a cost burning situation by circumstance, where there may not be housing available in their price range, where there may be job reduction, and so they have income loss. This tool was developed, as we mentioned, as a result of a request by our communities, the 2 county executives and 3 mayors, so that they could allocate CARES Act funding and other funding resources in response to what would ultimately be the lifting of the eviction and foreclosure ban, which happened on August 31st. Is there something I missed, Jill?
I would add that we really encourage, so as Sam was saying, this tool and the development of it really came out of us showing our communities the equity analysis. And so we really encourage our communities to look at data such as cost burdened and those at risk of eviction and foreclosure in conjunction with all the other data sets provided by the equity analysis to really help paint a more comprehensive picture of both needs that are existing as well as how to address those needs and to further identify who has those needs.
I think one other real key point to this too, and the kind of spin-off efforts that have come out of the equity analysis is the number of nonprofit partners that have said, wow, this actually helps us provide services in a more targeted way that ultimately helps move the needle towards solving this lack of access to opportunity for the specific issue that they're dealing with. Interestingly enough, just last week, we were actually approached by, we have 2 major hospital networks here. We were actually approached by the one to help them understand this a little bit better and get at one of the key components that we have felt like we were missing actually from our equity analysis, which is health data. In Pennsylvania, health information is only available at the county level. And since we needed to know with more granularity where we had lack of access to opportunity, we couldn't really tie that in to our initial analysis. They think that we can now negotiate a trade where they can help us figure out how to get that health information in a way, an aggregated way that protects people's personal information or specific locations of groups of persons with certain medical conditions. And then also we would then trade them for the analysis that we've done. And so that actually is probably going to come out in an even more evolved tool that has a different form of interactivity and web presence over time. So it's been really interesting because one thing I think is really important is when we did this in 2018, which was to really set the foundation to build our new joint comprehensive plan and our long-range transportation plan merger, no one really said anything. We were going all over the place talking about it, and they just said, okay, thank you very much. And I mean, no real, there wasn't any vitriol or anything associated with that conversation. But as a result of the update and the fact that it was in a lot of ways timed with this larger national conversation that people are having on race and identity, racial and cultural identity, people have now really started to pay attention. And that's really helped then move this work forward into the community and allowed it to evolve and change as it needs to really start moving towards some problem solving. And we didn't know it at the time because Future LV was completed at the end of last year and adopted at the end of last year, that we were actually really onto something in that plan. And the basis of those 2 policies that Jill had showed you earlier have really started to now play out into the implementation phase as we move forward and then lead to these other joint collaborative efforts.
So we're using the data available in both of these tools to develop a web-based report called the Lehigh Valley Housing Needs Analysis, which we expect to release in the winter. So we're looking forward to working on that further and having a very cumulative set of information to be able to share with our community. As Becky said, it's evolving, especially due to COVID. And so what we anticipated doing in the beginning of this year is not where we are now, and that's a good thing. It's a good problem to have. We're glad to be able to respond to the community's needs, and we hope you all will take a look when we release that in the winter time. With that, we'd love to get into some questions and answers.
Great. Well, thank you, Becky, Sam, Jill. This was great information, and I really love the website. I think it's fantastic. I'll leave it up just in case folks have questions on it. But really, I mean, all the information you presented, you know, it makes us feel like we should have confidence in the fact that issues that are as complicated and sometimes controversial as racial equity can be addressed in meaningful and important ways when the process is thoughtful, considered, and responsive to the community and the region at large, as you all have done so. And like we said, wanted to open up to a few questions and comments from folks that are in attendance. If just in case you missed it at the beginning, feel free to enter them to the questions box in the panel to what's probably the right-hand side of your screen. I think we did have one question pop up. Let me take a look at that. Let's see. Okay, I'll just let's see. Just wondering, what data sources does the equity analysis use?
So nearly all of the data is from the census. It is available for anybody's use. The only one that we had that was not from the census was that the standardized state testing PSSA scores. But other than that, everything is available from the census, and data limitations are one of the hurdles that we have been working to overcome. For example, we haven't been able to access any health data. If you notice that there weren't really any health metrics tied to the analysis, it can be really hard to get hands-on health data, obviously, but from the census.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's good to know that you're using such a public data source. It makes it an opportunity that other regional councils can use, since it's open public data and pretty easy to grab. The next question is, the analysis uses the phrase racial and ethnic identity, and what does that mean in the context of this analysis?
So that comes from the way that the census collects racial and ethnic data. So the census, both the census itself, the decennial census, and the American Community Survey are questions asked to the public for people to self-identify. So I, answering a survey, may be able to say, oh, myself personally, for example, I am half Chinese and half white. So in answering a question about race, I would have the opportunity to either say, well, culturally, I am white, but biologically, I am half Chinese. So it kind of complicates the understanding of identification of anybody. And so in order to make it really clear that we are not, or the global we, the census or the LVPC is not saying these people are Hispanic or Latino or white or Black, it is these people have indicated that they are their race or ethnicity.
Great, thank you. Really appreciated the fact that technology came up during the presentation, and just wondering if there was plans in the future to build that out in one of those census tract maps to where you could see access to broadband as opposed to other areas that may not have you know, access to those standard FCC speeds.
Actually, every last inch of the Lehigh Valley has access to internet connectivity at a pretty decent rate of speed, though along the Blue Mountain, which is where the Appalachian Trail, and is our northern border where the Appalachian Trail is located, it can get spotty because the topography changes rapidly. There's cellular access throughout the Lehigh Valley as well. So we are covered. Now it's more of a question of who has the ability to access that connectivity. Do they even know how to use a smartphone? Can they afford a smartphone? And Jill had mentioned that that's significantly poignant to not only school-age children that may not have families that can afford to buy a tablet or a computer, or let alone afford internet or cellular connectivity, but it also has significantly affected the elderly population in their access to healthcare. That's been very poignant during the pandemic. As many of you know, doctor's visits are basically through your smartphone now. They don't even want you coming into their offices. And if you're, an 85-year-old man or an 85-year-old woman, you may not have a smartphone. You may not know how to use it, and then or a computer, and not be able to do that video visit, which could, decrease your overall quality of life and ultimately access to opportunity. Those are just a couple of key vulnerabilities, I think, associated with the very sharp transition to a more technology reliant community as a result of the pandemic.
Great, thanks. So this is actually a fun comment. Brian Martin from MVRPC in Dayton, Ohio said, "Great job, Becky and team. I'm glad you have used the approach we shared and have grown it. Yep. Like you, the work led to many new partners for us too. We now have established an Institute for Equity and Livability that is becoming the region's lead organization in this space." So little shout out, kudos to making these connections through NARC and continuing the work in a meaningful way. Next question here is, there are other regions that do have significantly higher minority populations than the roughly 20% that you spoke about earlier in the Lehigh Valley. But, those folks aren't necessarily undertaking this type of work, or at least not as actively as you all are now. How did LVPC decide to make the equity analysis and related work a priority?
I think really it stems from our history, quite honestly. The Lehigh Valley, outside of people who were living here as Native Americans, really was settled by the Pennsylvania Germans, or the Pennsylvania Dutch as people call them, but it's just Deutsch. It means Deutsch, which means German. And they're still very much here. I'm married to one. They speak Pennsylvania Dutch before they speak English. They were really discriminated against by the English in Philadelphia. And they were actually, a lot of them, pushed into the Lehigh Valley as a result. So there's a historic open-mindedness to difference and relationship to your culture and your cultural identity. As a result of that, there's a community feeling that there are other populations that need the support and the kindness that was not paid to the historic population of settlers here. And so I hope I said that in the right way. These are kind of difficult things to talk about. But now, as we've changed globally and it's becoming more diverse and very rapidly, there's acceptance and understanding that we must do better. And there's a real desire to hold on to really what has been a significant, regardless of whether you're Pennsylvania German or not. But they were largely more Quaker philosophy, and I won't go too far into it, but that's a consensus community is essentially what that means. And so that idea that we would continue to be consensus-led, and consensus means everyone is at the table. And that ethos of build a bigger table is being the philosophy of the region as a whole, and certainly the philosophy of the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission since we were founded with, at the time they called it equality, but now we really know that means equity. And we've changed our mission back in 2017 to reflect that change in understanding and growing as an organization. Has really translated and supported us in this work. And again, that's then grown and grown and grown and grown and grown to the point where we're scratching our heads thinking, well, I don't know how many more requests for really cool projects that we want to do that we can handle. But it's a really great thing. And we've just been able to really build off that tolerance that was already here, and try to grow that in new and different ways and learn from the mistakes that have been made in the past, whether that's policy, investment, or other things. And there's always that recognition here that we have to do what's right now. And we are not going to erase the past. It is gone. But the biggest crime that we can do is destroy that past, that we have to own that past and learn from it and move forward in ways that meets the needs of the people today and tomorrow. And so as a result of that, everybody, they is, not only our commission and the Lehigh Valley Transportation Study, but the community and both county commissioners and county council, county executives, really behind the idea of this work. And are really carrying it forward in even their investment decisions. So it's something I think we can all be proud of. And I just feel really, really blessed that they keep going. They keep running a sprint and a marathon, don't stop. And they tell us that.
That's great. No, it's always good to have that support behind you, and so glad that it's worked out and that you're, continuing to move forward, standing on the shoulders of giants from your friends here at NARC, and really continuing the work. I can't think of a better way to end the webinar than that. So with that, I will close out, but I'm going to show my screen real quick so I can share your emails just in case folks want to get into contact with you. Here we go. All right. So thanks again, to you all, Becky, Sam, and Jill. That was a really interesting presentation and great Q&A too. Definitely learned a lot today. And for the folks that are still with us, you will get a copy of this webinar tomorrow, and as well as the slides, and we'll be sure to share the website as well so you could go take a look. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the LVPC staff here, or feel free to reach out to me or Neil Bomberg of our staff, and we're happy to make the connection between us and LVPC. But really just thank you everyone that joined us today, and please stay tuned for upcoming webinars dealing with equity and all the issues talked about today. We will be sending them out through the NARC email soon, so take a look at that. Otherwise, hope you all have a great day. Stay healthy, stay well, and thanks for joining us.